boy son of cleaning lady surprises millionaire by speaking 10 languages in front of company president. What seemed like just an ordinary workday turned into a spectacle of unexpected brilliance. While executives panicked, the boy took control of an international meeting with mastery. But the brilliance of talent also ignited the greed of forces that would do anything to control it. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. We continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll hear in your life. It was a seemingly ordinary morning in the imposing building of Global Corporation America. Executives hurried through marble corridors while Mrs. Nancy, a cleaning staff member for 12 years, finished her morning shift. The clock showed 7:40 when her cell phone rang. It was from Matthew's school, her 9-year-old son. Due to a teacher strike, classes had been suspended. Nancy took a deep breath, worried. She had no one to leave the boy with. "Bring him. Here, but keep an eye on him. Mr. Oliver doesn't like children wandering around the building," whispered her supervisor, understanding. An hour later, Matthew arrived at the corporate building. He was a thin boy with curious, attentive eyes. While his mother finished cleaning the meeting room on the 15th floor, he sat in a corner, leafing through an old dictionary he carried in his backpack, a gift from a teacher. On that same floor, a crisis was unfolding. 3 international executives waited in the adjacent room, while the translation team panicked. The Russian interpreter had been hospitalized in an emergency, and an important negotiation with Moscow investors was about to begin. "We've tried 3 agencies, no one available for today," exclaimed the secretary as she entered the room where Nancy was finishing cleaning the windows. Matthew, quiet in his corner, raised his eyes from the dictionary. He observed the growing movement, the palpable tension in the air. On the other side of the glass, he saw 3 men in dark suits with impatient expressions. One of them was speaking on the phone in a language the boy instantly recognized. "He's complaining about the delay," he commented quietly, not realizing he had been overheard by the secretary. "What? You understand Russian?" she asked, incredulous. Nancy froze, the cleaning cloth suspended in the air. "Matthew, don't interrupt people working," she admonished, embarrassed. But the secretary was already beside the boy. "What else is he saying?" That if they don't start in 15 minutes, they'll leave, that they've already missed the connection with Tokyo because of the time difference. The news quickly reached the American executives. Suspicious, they decided to test the boy. Within minutes, Matthew was standing before the company president, Richard Morrison, a 60-year-old man with a penetrating gaze. Next to him, Nancy trembled with nervousness. "This isn't a joke, is it, kid?" asked Morrison, skeptical. "No, sir." To test him, the president made a video call to a German partner. He asked them to chat briefly and for Matthew to translate. To everyone's amazement, the boy not only translated but corrected a technical error the German had made when describing the new operating system. "Where did you learn that, kid?" asked Morrison, now truly intrigued. "On the internet, sir, and with books from the public library. I like languages." "How many languages do you speak?" "Speak well, I think 10. Understand a few more." An astonished silence took over the room. Nancy didn't know where to hide her face. She had always known her son was intelligent, had always seen him poring over strange books, but she had never imagined the extent of his talent. How could she? In the difficulties of life as a single mother, working 2 jobs, the moments with Matthew were precious but scarce. "Do you attend any specific course?" asked the Human Resources Director. "No, Mum. At school we only have basic English." "And what school is that?" "Washington State School," replied Nancy, finding her voice. "It's close to home in the Hope Housing Complex." The contrast was evident. A boy from the suburbs, son of a cleaning lady, with an exceptional linguistic gift that could open doors at any multinational. Morrison observed, calculating possibilities. It wasn't just the boy's talent that impressed him, but the naturalness with which he demonstrated it, without vanity or pretension. The meeting with the Russians took place that same morning. Matthew, seated among executives in suits, translated with precision technical terms he had never formally studied. He captured nuances, subtle ironies, cultural references. At 9 years old, he mediated a $1 million negotiation with the same tranquility with which he leafed through his worn dictionary. When the investors left the building, Morrison called Nancy and Matthew to his private office. Through the panoramic window, the city could be seen like a living map, cut by congested avenues. "Your son has a gift, Mrs. Nancy, a gift that should not be wasted." She nodded, still dazed by the morning's events. "I'm willing to offer a full scholarship for Matthew at the International School of Boston. I know the director personally." Nancy's eyes widened. It was the most prestigious institution in the city, attended by the children of the business and diplomatic elite. "In addition," continued Morrison, "I would like to promote you to coordinator of our new cultural integration department. We need someone with sensitivity to deal with our international visitors, organize multicultural events. Your current supervisor speaks very highly of your work and dedication." "But sir, I don't have training for that. I don't speak other languages. I barely finished high school." "Technical training can be acquired, Mrs. Nancy. Character and dedication are rarer, and from what I see, talent runs in the family." As they left the imposing building, mother and son walked in silence, trying to process the turnaround that a simple school strike had caused in their lives. At the bus stop, while waiting for the bus that would take them back to the housing complex where they lived, Matthew held his mother's hand. "Are you happy, Mom?" Nancy looked at her son, that small being she had raised alone between sacrifices and modest hopes. She had never imagined he harbored such a vast universe within himself. "I'm scared, son. It's a lot of change at once." "I can refuse the scholarship if you prefer." She squeezed the small hand between her own, calloused from work. "No way. This is your chance, my love. The chance I never had." The bus arrived, noisy. As they boarded, Nancy couldn't hold back a silent tear, not of sadness but of an indefinable emotion, a mixture of pride, fear, and hope. Beside her, Matthew kept in his pocket the card President Morrison had given him with a personal number. "For any emergency," the businessman had said, with a smile that didn't match his usual severity. What neither of them knew, as the bus moved through the congested streets, was that this was only the first chapter of a story that would transform not only their lives, but those of many other people. Matthew's gift, flourishing in the shadow of simplicity, was about to illuminate unexpected paths and awaken powerful interests, some benevolent, others not so much. 2 weeks passed since the episode at the corporate building. The small apartment, in the housing complex where Nancy and Matthew lived, was now filled with cardboard boxes. Changes in life, in address, in perspectives. A new reality was unfolding before them, like a map yet to be explored. On Matthew's first day at the International School of Boston, Nancy woke up before the alarm. She prepared a special breakfast and carefully arranged the new uniform on the bed with reverential care. It was an elegant outfit, with the institution's coat of arms embroidered on the pocket, a globe surrounded by symbols representing arts and sciences. "Are you nervous?" she asked, while helping her son adjust his navy blue tie. "A little," admitted Matthew, observing his own reflection in the mirror. He looked like a different person in those clothes. The car sent by the company was waiting at the building door. During the journey, Nancy repeated her recommendations. Be polite, pay attention in class, don't be intimidated by classmates from wealthy families. Matthew just nodded, his eyes fixed on the landscape that gradually changed. The buildings got taller, the streets more tree-lined, the shop windows more elegant. The school was an impressive complex, with meticulously maintained gardens and facilities that resembled a university campus more than anything. At the entrance, they were received by the pedagogical coordinator, Dr. Elizabeth Fontaine, a middle-aged woman with impeccable posture and a calculatedly welcoming smile. "Welcome to our school community." President Morrison spoke very highly of you, she said, leading them through the silent corridors. Classes had already begun. Nancy said goodbye to her son with a tight hug before heading to her first day in her new position. "Remember, you deserve to be here," she whispered in his ear. Upon entering the fifth-grade classroom, Matthew felt all eyes turn to him. The comparative literature teacher, Mr. Bergman, a grey-bearded Swede, interrupted his explanation about Nordic myths. "Class, this is Matthew Alves, our new classmate. As previously informed, he is joining our Excellence Scholarship program. Please make him feel welcome." Matthew walked to an empty desk at the back of the room, aware of the whispers and curious glances. Next to him, a girl with curly hair and colorful glasses watched him with interest. "Hi, I'm Isabella," she introduced herself in a whisper when the teacher resumed the class. "Everyone is talking about you. Is it true you speak 10 languages?" "More or less," he replied, embarrassed. During the break, while most students gathered in closed groups in the courtyard, Matthew remained alone, observing the social dynamics of that new world. Isabella approached again, carrying a heavy backpack. "Want to know my secret place?" she invited. She led him to the library, a spacious area with shelves that reached the ceiling. In the mezzanine, there was a cozy corner with cushions and a view of the internal garden. "I come here every day, nobody bothers me," she explained, taking from her backpack a notebook full of colorful notes and drawings. "I have dyslexia. I need to study twice as hard to keep up with classes." "What exactly is dyslexia?" asked Matthew, curious. "My brain processes letters differently. Sometimes they seem to dance on the page. Other times, they switch places." Matthew considered for a moment. "Like the words speak a different language from yours?" Isabella smiled, surprised by the analogy. "Yeah, something like that. I never thought of it that way." On the other side of the city, Nancy faced her own challenges. The new office on the 12th floor was spacious and bright, with a sign on the door that read, "Cultural Integration Coordination." The mahogany desk, the cutting-edge computer, the panoramic view, everything seemed to belong to someone else, not to the woman who, until 2 weeks ago, had been scrubbing the same floors she now walked on in high heels. "Your schedule for today," informed the assistant assigned to help her, handing over a folder. "At 10 a.m. meeting with the events team. At 2 p.m. video conference with the French partners. At 4 p.m. presentation of the semester plan to the board." Nancy felt her stomach sink. She didn't understand corporate events, didn't speak French, didn't know how to develop a semester plan. What was Richard Morrison thinking when he promoted her? In the meeting room, her new colleagues greeted her with polite smiles but evaluative looks. Subtle comments escaped in the corridors. "She's only here because of her prodigy son. How long until they realize their mistake? I heard she was a cleaning lady." Nancy swallowed her pride and dedicated herself to learning. In the first weeks, she stayed at the office until late, studying terms of corporate protocol, international event practices, corporate etiquette. Her only advantage was the practical knowledge of the company, years silently observing its operation, its informal hierarchies, its undeclared dynamics. One night, as she returned to the new apartment that the company had made available closer to work, Nancy found Matthew asleep over his books. Next to him, a Japanese dictionary and meticulous notes. Her heart tightened. Even with his natural talent, her son was trying as hard as she was to adapt to the new world. Weeks turned into months. At school, Matthew and Isabella developed a routine. He helped her with languages, creating memorization systems adapted to her way of learning. She helped him navigate the social labyrinth of the Boston elite, explaining implicit codes he would never learn from books. "Why do they always ask where I spent vacations?" he questioned one afternoon, confused after another isolated lunch in the cafeteria. "It's a way of classifying you," explained Isabella. "International vacations mean status. Don't worry, I've never been to Europe either." At night, mother and son compared their experiences, laughing at the gaffes, celebrating the small victories, consoling each other in defeats. They became experts at identifying fake smiles, condescending compliments, veiled expectations. Bastiri, the corporation, Nancy surprised the board by organizing a cultural integration event that combined sophistication and authenticity. She invited artists from peripheral communities for presentations that enchanted foreign investors, tired of the same protocol programs. "It's refreshing to see someone with a different perspective," commented President Morrison after the Japanese partners sent a special thank you letter. "Keep it up, Nancy." But not everything was rosy. Certain directors questioned her methods, her authority, her decisions. In a particularly tense meeting, the financial vice president suggested that her department was superfluous and could suffer budget cuts. The department has existed for only 4 months and has already brought in 3 international contracts. Nancy defended herself with a firmness that surprised everyone, including herself. Perhaps we should review which sectors truly add value to the company. Morrison's support was her only security, and Nancy knew she needed to constantly prove her worth to maintain it. The pressure was immense but smaller than her determination. Meanwhile, at school, Matthew gained academic recognition. His language teachers challenged him with advanced texts, and he participated in state linguistic competitions. With Isabella, he developed a study method that combined colors, sounds, and images to help her overcome the obstacles of dyslexia. The friendship between them strengthened, based on a mutual understanding that transcended social and cognitive differences. On an autumn morning, while mother and son were having breakfast before leaving for another day in their respective worlds, the apartment doorbell rang. It was too early to be the company driver. Nancy opened the door and felt her blood freeze. Standing before her was a man she hadn't seen in almost 10 years, Edward Sanders, Matthew's father, who had abandoned them when his son was only 6 months old. "Nancy," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "we need to talk about our son." On his face, the same beauty that had enchanted Nancy a decade ago. In his eyes, a calculating gleam she didn't recognize, and in his tone of voice, a disturbing certainty. That man hadn't returned by chance. He wanted something, and Nancy suspected that something was precisely Matthew's special gift. Matthew watched from the bedroom door unnoticed. The man in front of his mother was tall, wore an impeccable suit, and displayed a smile that didn't seem sincere. Something in Nancy's tense posture alerted the boy. This stranger brought trouble. "What do you want after so long?" asked Nancy, keeping the door half closed, like a physical barrier between her ex-partner and her home. "I heard about our son's talent," replied Edward, emphasizing "our" with a naturalness that sounded fake. "News travels in the business world. A prodigy boy linguist, son of an ex-cleaning lady promoted to cultural coordinator. It wasn't hard to connect the dots." "You have no rights over him. You disappeared when he was still a baby." "Legally, I'm still his father. There was never a process to terminate my parental rights." Nancy felt her stomach sink. It was true. At the time, consumed by the pain of abandonment and the daily struggle for survival, she hadn't had the resources or energy to legally formalize Edward's absence. "What do you want?" she repeated, trying to keep her voice firm. "To meet my son, and to offer him opportunities that not even global corporation America can provide." It was then that Edward noticed the boy watching from the bedroom doorway. The man's eyes gleamed with an interest that made Nancy shudder. "You must be Matthew," he said, opening a wider smile. "I'm Edward, your father." Matthew remained silent. Studying that figure, he knew only from an old yellowed photograph his mother kept in a drawer. He noticed the luxury watch, the precise haircut, the discreet pin on his lapel, a symbol he recognized as the logo of the Horizon Advanced Research Institute, an organization funded by the biggest competitor of the company where his mother worked. "Go to your room, son," Nancy requested. "You don't need to protect him from me, Nancy. After all, I'm his father." "A father who shows up after 9 years isn't a father. He's a stranger," she replied, regaining her firmness. Edward sighed theatrically. "I understand your resentment, but I'm here now, and I have legal rights. We can resolve this in a civilized way, or I can have my lawyers file for joint custody." The threat hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Nancy closed her eyes for a moment, remembering the years of solitary struggle, the sleepless nights when Matthew was sick, the overtime too. Buy school supplies, the daily sacrifices that Edward had never known. "Why now?" asked Matthew, surprising both of them. His voice was calm, analytical. Why become interested in me precisely when they discovered my ability with languages? Edward seemed disconcerted by his son's insight. People change, Matthew. I made mistakes, but I want to correct them. And yes, I was proud to learn about your extraordinary talent. It's natural for a father to want to be present when his son shows potential. You work at the Horizon Institute, observed the boy, pointing to the pin. It's the main competitor of the company where my mother works. A flash of irritation crossed Edward's face, quickly replaced by a condescending smile. I see you inherited my intelligence. Yes, I'm the director of the Linguistic Research Department at the Institute. We're developing a revolutionary project called Babel, focused exactly on abilities like yours. Nancy stepped forward, placing herself between Edward and her son. Enough. I won't allow you to use Matthew as a laboratory guinea pig. Gary. Pig? What an exaggeration, Nancy. We're talking about specialized education, international opportunities, developing a unique talent. Project Babel can offer Matthew much more than a simple school scholarship. The answer is no, declared Nancy. Now please leave before I call building security. Edward adjusted his tie, unperturbed. You'll hear from my lawyer soon. Think carefully, Nancy. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. After his departure, a heavy silence took over the apartment. Matthew watched his mother, who trembled slightly as she closed the door. Is he really going to try to take me? Asked the boy. Nancy hugged her son tightly. I won't allow it. Never. That same afternoon, Nancy entered Richard Morrison's office. Without a prior appointment, something unthinkable in the company's protocol. With a trembling voice, she reported what had happened. Edward Sanders, the research director of the Horizon Institute? Asked Morrison, suddenly alert. This is more serious than you imagine, Nancy. The president explained that Project Babel was the subject of speculation in the business and scientific community. Rumors indicated it was an initiative to identify and train people with exceptional linguistic abilities, aiming at applications in competitive intelligence, cybersecurity, and even international military operations. It's no coincidence that he appeared now. They must have been monitoring our talents for some time. What can we do? Asked Nancy, desperate. I'll assign our legal team to your case immediately, and I suggest that you and Matthew temporarily move to one of the corporate apartments in the gated community. For safety. The following days were tense. Nancy received the official notification from Edward's lawyers requesting joint custody and decision-making rights over her son's education. The justification claimed that the child's exceptional talent required specialized guidance that the mother, despite being well-intentioned, was not qualified to provide. At school, Matthew noticed the presence of a man who introduced himself as a journalist, interested in doing a story about precocious talents. Friendly and attentive, Daniel Freeman quickly gained the trust of students and teachers. Especially interested in Matthew, he proposed a special interview for a supposed educational program. It was Isabella who first became suspicious. During the break, she observed the so-called journalist discreetly photographing Matthew's notebook, which contained advanced linguistic exercises developed by the school teachers. There's something strange about him, she commented to her friend. Journalists don't usually photograph notebooks without asking. Matthew, alerted by his friend, began to pay more attention. He noticed how Daniel asked specific questions about his learning methods, his study routines, the languages he mastered. Best. Once he accidentally dropped a business card displaying the same symbol of the Horizon Institute. When Matthew told his suspicions to his mother, Nancy immediately informed the school administration and Richard Morrison. A quick investigation confirmed. Daniel Freeman was actually Danny Ferris, a research associate at the Horizon Institute and a direct subordinate of Edward Sanders. The fake journalist was banned from campus, but the damage was done. Information about Matthew's learning method, his academic progress, and his linguistic techniques had already been passed on to the Institute. Worse, the case leaked to the real press. The next morning, sensationalist headlines splashed across newspapers and news portals. Prodigy boy, the 9-year-old polyglot who speaks 10 languages. From cleaning lady's son to linguistic genius, Matthew Alves's story. Custody battle for the little translator, biological father against corporation. The public exposure transformed Matthew and Nancy's lives into a nightmare. Reporters camped outside the school and the condominium. Classmates asked for autographs, treating him like a celebrity. Teachers felt pressured to showcase his talent in public demonstrations. At the company, Nancy's situation also became complicated. Some directors questioned whether the personal conflict represented a risk for the corporation. Others suggested that the company should capitalize on the publicity, using Matthew as a kind of institutional mascot at international events. "He's a child, not a corporate asset," Nancy reacted, indignant, during a tense board meeting. Meanwhile, Edward took advantage of the visibility to strengthen his court case. In strategic interviews, he presented himself as a father concerned about his son's healthy development, questioning whether the sudden media exposure wasn't harmful to the child. "My only interest is to offer Matthew an environment where his talent can flourish without commercial pressures or excessive exposure," he declared on a widely watched program. Project Babel was created to protect and nurture exceptional minds like his. What Edward didn't mention, publicly, and what a private investigator hired by Morrison discovered, was that the Horizon Institute had recently signed a confidential contract with a foreign intelligence agency. The objective? To develop methods of linguistic interception and decoding for sensitive international communications. "Your ex-partner doesn't want Matthew out of paternal love," Morrison explained to Nancy. "He wants your son's brain." The pressure began to affect Matthew. Always reserved, the boy became even more introverted. His grades, previously exemplary, began to fall. He avoided speaking other languages, even in specific classes. At night, Nancy found him curled up in bed, pretending to sleep, but with his eyes open, staring at the ceiling. Isabella was his only connection to normality. The friend, immune to the fascination with her colleague's sudden fame, continued to treat him as always. During breaks, they took refuge in the library, where Isabella read him comic books, a welcome pause from the constant linguistic pressure. "Did you know my dad has cameras even in his car?" commented Isabella one afternoon as they leafed through a book. "He's paranoid about security since his office was broken into last year." Matthew looked up, suddenly interested. "What kind of cameras?" "Those tiny ones, hidden in the corners. They record audio too. He says they've saved his company several times." An idea began to form in the boy's mind. A risky idea, but one that could be the only way out of the impasse that his life had become. If Edward was willing to use tricks to get what he wanted, perhaps it was time to retaliate with the same coin. On the eve of the preliminary custody hearing, while Nancy consulted lawyers and prepared documents, Matthew called Isabella for a serious conversation in the school garden. "I need your help," he said with an unusual determination for a 9-year-old boy, "and your father's too." The plan was audacious and dangerous, but as Matthew explained to his friend, it might be the only way to reveal Edward Sanders' true face and the real intentions behind Project Babel. The Central Courthouse of Boston was exceptionally busy that morning. In the third-floor corridor, a small crowd gathered, journalists, curious onlookers, and even some students from the international school who had obtained special authorization to follow the case. In the courtroom, Nancy nervously adjusted the collar of her new blazer. Beside her, the legal team from Global Corporation America checked documents and exchanged strategic whispers. On the other side of the room, Edward Sanders displayed confidence, surrounded by lawyers from a renowned firm specializing in family law. Matthew, seated between his mother and Richard Morrison, kept his gaze fixed on his own hands. He seemed smaller and more fragile in the children's suit he was wearing for the first time. Occasionally, his eyes sought a specific point in the audience: Isabella and her father, businessman Anthony Miller, owner of an electronic security company. Judge Claudia Montgomery entered the room, bringing with her an immediate silence. With more than 20 years of experience in family cases, she was known for her insight. and the absolute priority she gave to the welfare of children involved in judicial disputes. We are here for a preliminary hearing in the case of joint custody requested by Mr. Edward Sanders in relation to the minor Matthew Alves, she announced after the initial formalities. Given the sensitive nature of the case and the presence of the press, I determined that only the parties directly involved and their legal representatives remain in the room. After the departure of journalists and spectators, with the exception of Isabella and her father, who remained at the express request of Nancy's lawyers, the session began. Edward's lawyer presented the case first, with carefully constructed arguments. Your Honor, my client never legally abdicated his paternal rights. His temporary departure, although regrettable, occurred at a time of professional disorientation. Today, as a director of a respected research institute, he is in a privileged position to ensure that his son's exceptional talent is properly nurtured. The lawyer continued detailing the supposed advantages that Project Babel would offer Matthew. Personalized teaching methodologies, contact with renowned linguists, international opportunities. He described the institute as a sanctuary for exceptional minds and insinuated that Global Corporation was commercially exploiting a child for institutional marketing purposes. When it was time for Nancy's defense, her lead attorney highlighted Edward's complete absence during practically all of Matthew's life, presenting school, medical, and community records where his name never appeared. Witnesses, former neighbors, teachers, even the municipal librarian who had helped Matthew access books in foreign languages, confirmed that Nancy had been the boy's only parental reference. Richard Morrison testified about how he discovered Matthew's talent and assured that the educational scholarship and Nancy's promotion were corporate decisions based on merit, not exploitation. Mrs. Alves has demonstrated exceptional competence in her position, regardless of her son's abilities, he stated. As for the boy, our only intervention was to provide quality education without any contractual counterpart. The judge listened attentively, making occasional notes. When all the formal testimonies ended, she addressed Matthew directly. I would like to hear from you now, young man. It is not common for children your age to testify formally, but this case has particularities that justify an exception. Do you feel comfortable speaking? Matthew nodded, casting a quick glance at Isabella, who responded with a subtle gesture of encouragement. Mr. Sanders, you are my biological father, but you were never my real father, began the boy, with a clear voice, although slightly trembling. You were never present when I was sick, when I started reading, when I learned my first word in another language. My mother worked 2 jobs to give me the basics, while you never even sent a birthday card. Edward tried to interrupt, but the judge silenced him with a firm gesture. You only appeared when you discovered I had a talent that could be useful for your work, continued Matthew. It's not fair that now you want to decide about my life. The judge studied the boy with interest. Matthew, you mentioned that your father wants your talent for his work. Can you explain better? It was at this moment that Anthony Miller, Isabella's father, stood up and requested permission to present evidence. The judge, intrigued, authorized it. Your Honor, my company develops security systems. My daughter and Matthew are close friends. When we learned of the situation, we offered technical assistance. With judicial permission, Anthony connected a device to the room's audiovisual system. On the screen appeared the image of the interior of a luxury car. Edward Sanders was at the wheel, talking on the phone via Bluetooth system. The date in the lower corner showed that the recording had been made 3 days earlier. The installation was done with judicial authorization obtained at the request of Global Corporation's legal team, clarified Nancy's lawyer, handing documents to the judge. There was suspicion that the minor could be at risk. In the video, Edward was conversing in English with someone identified only as Director of Operations. The conversation, subtitled in English for the court, revealed the true nature of Project Babel. The kid is a phenomenon, exactly what we need for the advanced interception program, Edward said in the video. Imagine combining his natural ability with our algorithms. We could decipher communications in real time without relying on flawed automated translations. And you're sure you'll get custody? Asked the voice on the phone. The mother doesn't have the resources to fight against our lawyers for long. And we have allies in the judiciary. Besides, we're building a public narrative that the boy is being exploited by the rival corporation. Public opinion will be on our side. And if the boy resists, from what I understand, he's quite attached to his mother. Edward's smile in the recording was disturbingly cold. Children adapt, especially when isolated from their previous references. A few weeks at the training center in Geneva, away from maternal influence, and he'll be perfectly malleable. The courtroom plunged into shocked silence when the recording ended. Edward, livid, stood up abruptly. "This is illegal, a trap. I'll sue all of you for invasion of privacy." The judge interrupted him with severity. "Control yourself, Mr. Sanders." The recording was obtained with judicial authorization, as proven by the documents presented, and its content is, at the very least, disturbing. Turning to Matthew, she asked in a softer voice, "Did you know about this recording?" "It was my idea," admitted the boy. "After we discovered that the fake journalist at school worked for the Institute, I suspected that my biological father had other interests. Isabella told me about the security systems her father's company installs. I thought that maybe we could discover the truth." The judge observed the boy with new respect. At 9 years old, he had demonstrated not only exceptional linguistic talent but remarkable insight and maturity. "This court will make a final decision after detailed analysis of all evidence," she declared. "But given the facts presented today, I determine the maintenance of exclusive custody with Mrs. Nancy Elvis and suspend any visitation rights of Mr. Edward Sanders until the conclusion of the process. Additionally, I will issue a restraining order, prohibiting any contact between the petitioner and the minor." Turning to Edward, she added, "And I strongly recommend that you consult your criminal attorney. The evidence suggests an attempt to use a child for possibly illegal purposes, which may constitute various crimes." As they left the courthouse, Nancy hugged her son tightly, silent tears streaming down her face. Matthew, exhausted by the day's tension, returned the hug with equal intensity. "Is it over, Mom?" he asked in a low voice. "The hardest part, yes," she replied, stroking his hair, "but now we have other decisions to make." In the following weeks, the scandal involving Project Babel occupied national headlines. The Horizon Institute publicly broke with Edward, claiming to be unaware of his methods and intentions. Investigations revealed connections between the project and intelligence agencies and digital surveillance companies interested in exploiting rare linguistic talents for decoding protected communications. For Matthew, however, the public exposure had become unbearable. The boy began to show clear signs of anxiety: insomnia, lack of appetite, refusal to practice languages, even in the school environment. The medical diagnosis was clear: post-traumatic stress and emotional overload. On a particularly difficult night after Matthew had a panic attack upon hearing a foreign language on television, Nancy made a decision. She sought out Richard Morrison and requested an extended leave. "I need to remove my son from this environment. He needs to just be a child again." To her surprise, Morrison not only agreed, but offered an unexpected solution. The corporation owns a property in rural Virginia, a restored farm away from urban bustle. We usually use it for executive retreats, but it's available now. You could stay there as long as necessary. 3 months later, Matthew and Nancy were adapted to rural life. The boy, initially withdrawn, gradually began to rediscover his connection with languages, no longer as a skill to be displayed or exploited, but as a form of personal expression. He created diaries in different languages, invented his own alphabets, played with sounds. Isabella visited them frequently during school vacations. Their friendship, strengthened by the shared crisis, had become a safe harbor for both. Together, they created fantastic stories in invented languages, a particular code that only they understood. During one of these visits, Richard Morrison also appeared. During a dinner on the farm's porch, while the children played in the garden, he made a surprising confession to Nancy. "I too was a child with an unrecognized gift," he revealed. "Not as spectacular as Matthew's, but significant. I grew up in an orphanage where no one noticed my mathematical abilities. It was only in adolescence, when a teacher noticed my talent, that I received any encouragement. Nancy then understood Morrison's personal interest in her son. It wasn't just corporate strategy, but a form of reparation, of breaking a cycle of ignored or exploited talents. When you're both ready to return, there will be a place for both of you, he assured. No pressures, no disproportionate expectations, just the necessary space for each to develop their potential at their own pace. At the school, inspired by Isabella and Matthew's story, the principal implemented a pioneering program to support neurodivergent students. The friendship between the polyglot boy and the dyslexic girl had become a case study on how different ways of processing information can complement and enrich each other. The Horizon Institute, after the restructuring that followed the scandal, completely reformulated its approach. The new Project Babel, now supervised by an independent ethics committee, transformed into a voluntary linguistic development program for talented young people, with an emphasis on humanitarian applications, translation of minority literature, preservation of endangered languages, development of inclusive teaching methods. As for Edward, after facing lawsuits for false identity and attempted exploitation of a minor, he withdrew from the spotlight. Years later, Matthew would receive a letter from him, a late but apparently sincere request for forgiveness, which the young man would keep as part of his history without allowing it to define his future. In the last scene of this story, we don't find courtrooms or corporate meeting rooms, just a simple setting. Two children sitting under an ancient cherry tree, surrounded by colorful notebooks and books worn from use. Matthew, now 10 years old, writes in an alphabet of his own creation, while Isabella illustrates the margins. With vibrant drawings, from a distance Nancy observes with a serene smile. Her son's talent had finally found its true purpose, not as a corporate weapon, not as an instrument of power, but as a bridge between worlds, a form of human connection, an expression of creative freedom. "What are you inventing now?" she asks, approaching with a tray of lemonade. "A new language," replies Matthew, with the enthusiasm that had disappeared during the months of crisis. "We're calling it friendships. It's a language where there are no words for war, competition, or abandonment, but it has many words for different types of smiles," adds Isabella, raising her notebook full of colorful symbols, "and for all ice cream flavors." Nancy laughs, a genuine laugh that echoes through the garden. As the sun sets on the horizon of the farm, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, she understands a fundamental truth. Her son's greatest gift was never speaking 10 languages, but his ability to create connections, to transform differences into bridges to find beauty in diversity. And that gift, unlike what Edward or the Horizon Institute thought, could never be contained in laboratories or exploited for strategic purposes. It was like language itself, alive, fluid, constantly evolving. A gift that finally could flourish in freedom. The end of the story. Dear listeners, we hope that Matthew and Nancy's journey has touched your hearts. True talent lies not only in extraordinary abilities, but in the courage to be authentic and the wisdom to use our gifts to build, never to destroy. If this story awakened emotions in you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like this video. We have prepared a special playlist with other equally inspiring narratives, which you can access by clicking on the link to your left. Every day, we bring unique stories that explore the complexity and beauty of life. We want to know your opinion in the comments.